In this video, we're going to look at how to build forms in dashboards. So to build forms in dashboards, we're going to take advantage of the new UD form component. And it's pretty easy to create a basic form. You just need to call new UD form and then specify some content. And then the content of your form are your controls. So in this case, I just have a single text box. And you're going to want to set the ID of that text box so that we can evaluate the contents of that later on. So then the other required parameter for new UD form is onSubmit. And onSubmit accepts a script block as well. And when the form is submitted, that script block is called. And any form values that are passed in will come in through the event data. So for example, I have this text field, and then my event data will have a single property for that text field containing the text that was entered. So if I save this form and then I go view my form on my dashboard, you'll see I have a real simple form. Single text box that hasn't really been configured at all except for the ID. If I type in test and click submit, you'll see that test shows up in this modal right here. So obviously you could call whatever PowerShell scripts you want inside here. You can call commandlets to create users or exchange mailboxes and that kind of thing. So we support a bunch of different components inside forms. So I have a form where I've created each one of the components. So you can see here I have a new UD form, and the components that we support are autocomplete, checkboxes, date pickers, radio groups, selects, sliders, switches, text boxes, time pickers, transfer lists, and file uploads. So we are going to have some videos for each one of these components, but in this example, I've just kind of created each one of these components real basically. So I've added some options to my autocomplete, I've added a couple options to my radio group, and my select, as well as my transfer list. And then in my onSubmit, what I'm actually doing is I'm accessing a couple of those different components. So I'm going to show a toast message for the value of the slider and the switch. So if I save that now and go over to my dashboard, you'll see that I have a little bit more of a complex form here that has all the components. So in my autocomplete, you can see that as I type, it's going to start autocompleting. I have a checkbox. I can select the different dates via my date picker. I have options for my radio box. I have my select dropdown. I have my slider. I have my switch, which is very much like a checkbox. It just looks different. Just a basic text box, a time picker, and a transfer list, as well as an upload, so I can select upload files. And then I'm going to click submit. And now you can see I got two values. I got true and 45. That's because my slider was at 45 and my switch was set to true. If I submit it again, you'll see that those values have changed. All right, so what's cool about forms is you can actually format them. So you don't have to just have this kind of ugly layout that I've created here. Inside the content, you can nest your form controls. So you can see here I have a card, and then I've created another form. And inside the content, I've actually set up a layout. And inside that layout, I've set up the text boxes. So what's cool about this is that it means you can, put rows and columns. You can also put other components that don't support forms, form integration into the content, just for display purposes and that kind of thing. And it will still work with the form. And you can see here that I'm just again showing the modal, but let's just look at what that looks like. You can see here now I have a layout which I've specified 2 columns, and because of that I have 2 columns and 2 rows. If I were to add a couple more items to this, I could add 4 and 5, save that, and now you're going to see that I have 6 text boxes. And like I said, you can also add just arbitrary components to this. So if I want to just add some text there, you can see hello shows up underneath my text boxes. So we kind of integrate with the form, and it's really dynamic in terms of how you can lay it out. All right, so one cool thing about forms is not only can you submit a form and have it pop up a modal or a toast or that kind of thing, but you can also have it return a component. So in this example, I have a text box and then a severity select box. And you can see I have 4 different severities. And then I'm returning a component from my onSubmit. So when you return a component from your onSubmit, it's going to display it after the form is submitted. And it's actually going to replace the form. So you can think of like, searching for something and showing a table, or entering some data and showing a chart. So we will save that. And now you can see I have my text box and my drop down. So I'll say, oh no, warning. And if you click submit, you can see that the form was replaced with an alert that is in the warning state. If I were to change this text and do something like info, you can see that the alert is in info now. Forms also support validation. So if you want to validate a form, you can do something like this. So I have content. I have my single text box here, which is text validate form. And then I'm actually getting my event data, and I'm checking the status of my event data in the onValidate. So this one is not required, it's optional, but when you have onValidate defined, it's going to call that whenever there are changes made to your form. And in this case, I'm just looking to make sure that text validate form has some value. So I'm checking for null or empty, and what you do is just return this validation result. So if there was an error, you want to use the validate error parameter, and then it will actually display an error. And if it's a valid result, you want to use the switch parameter for valid. And then finally, I'm just showing a toast. So let's save that and go view that and see what that looks like. So you can see that the text validate form is required. So it ran the validation, and that is required. If I start typing, you're going to see that the validation goes away. And if I erase that text, it comes back. So I can't submit this form when validation is failing, but as soon as I have a valid form, I can submit it. So what's cool about that is you can run any kind of form validation logic in here. You can check values either within your form or hit some external system like Active Directory or like a CSV file you have saved to validate that the form contains the right content before submitting it. Another feature of forms is the ability to cancel a form input. And this is primarily nice for forms that are within modals. So I have a button here, and when I click the button, I am going to show this modal. It's going to have a single text box and a onSubmit button. In both cases of an onSubmit and an onCancel, we're going to hide the modal. So this is, again, not required. You don't have to have an onCancel, but if you have an onCancel, the behavior of this is like you have an onForm, and we're going to show an additional button for cancel. So submitting it will show the toast and hide the form, but canceling it will just hide the form. It won't show the toast because it called the onCancel rather than the onSubmit. All right, let's look at another example where we actually want to like leave the form but also display something. So you can accomplish that in conjunction with the setUDElement commandlet. So we're calling new UD form with a single text box, and what we are trying to do is update the contents of this new UD element with the ID tags to contain this card. So when this is submitted, I'm calling setUDElement, and I'm saying the results div down here should contain the content of this setUDElement call. So when I do this, what you're going to see is I have a form on top, and if I were to put something in there, it's actually going to create the card on the bottom. So this is cool for tables or anything we want to like filter something, but still have the form on the top and then display something on the bottom. So you could update a bunch of controls in here. You can't, you don't have to just have one setUDElement call. You could have like 3 or 4 and then like update all kinds of charts and tables and stuff like that if you wanted to. All right, for my final example, we're going to get a little more complicated in our form, and this is going to be a form that actually is dynamic based on what you're selecting in the form. So we're going to save this, and I'm going to step through what this is doing. So in the contents of the form, we just have 2 select options inside my select. So I have a new UD select, and the ID is state, and then I have 2 options. One is Wisconsin, and one is Idaho. When that changes, what we're going to do is we're actually going to update a city's session variable. So a session variable is stored just for this user. It won't update or affect other users. And if the selected value is Idaho, then we're going to set some cities in Idaho into the cities array here. Then we're going to call sync UD element, which I'll show you what that does and kind of describe how that works. And then we kind of have another section here for Wisconsin. So we're going to, again, set a bunch of options for different cities in Wisconsin, and then sync UD element. On the bottom here, we have a new UD dynamic. So this is actually still within the content of the form. And this dynamic actually checks to see if we have cities. If we've set the cities variable, it's going to show a new select. And this select is going to contain the options that we, based on the state that we selected. So if I select Idaho, those will have the Idaho cities. And if I select Wisconsin, that will have the Wisconsin cities. And this is where sync UD element comes into play. When you call sync UD element, what it does is it causes this section, this dynamic section, to reload. So it reevaluates all the stuff inside the content block. So when you select something, what it's doing is it's actually updating the city's session variable, causing the dynamic to reevaluate, which then has values, and then it's going to create a new select inside there that contains our cities. And then finally, I will just show UD toast for the cities. So we'll save that. And now you can see that we have just a single dropdown. And remember, we created two dropdowns, one for state and then one for city. But because the session cities does not exist, it's not displaying that city dropdown. But if I were to select a different city, you can see that it's changing. So now we have the Haley cities. And if we go back to Wisconsin, you'll see we have the Wisconsin cities. And then if I select one of those and hit submit, you can see it submitted that Wisconsin city. So that's pretty cool, and kind of a way that you can make your forms more dynamic based on options users are selecting. So they might select an OU, and then you have a certain set of groups that you could put users in that OU. So in this video, we went through how to create forms in dashboards inside PowerShell Universal.